Well, I haven't got any chocolates and I'm not a crowd surfer, but if you'd like to buy some quality compost at a good show price, come and see me later on. Okay, the presentation today, in overview, I'll give you a brief idea of A&L for those of you who don't know anything about us. I'll talk a bit about our infrastructure project, our Waste Less Recycle More project. I want to talk for some time about the differences in approach, the business models and marketing philosophies for organics. And I'll talk a bit about where we see we're going with perhaps FOGO markets and perhaps issues that we might see down the track. Look, I think probably a lot of people know us. We're a landscape and horticultural supplies company. We're a resource company, not a waste company. And there is a very significant difference there. If you see a resource, you see value. If you see value, you want to see it recognised in price. If you see waste, you see a problem, and you're looking for a way to resolve that problem for as little cost as possible. So there is a significant difference. In terms of the materials we handle, it's around about 400 and something thousand tonne per annum. You can see the sort of materials that we currently process. Our market footprint is fairly extensive. Obviously, we began as a horticultural urban supplier. We got very much into the intensive horticulture market many years ago, and obviously our focus really nowadays is on broadacre ag, cropping and grazing in particular. This is a pretty lousy slide, so I won't spend much time on it. Really, the reason for putting that up was to show that our footprint, don't worry about the colours of the dots, they're either resellers, bulk resellers of our products, they're processing sites of ours or they're sales sites of ours, or they're points where we recover and bring back other resources. So our model is very much about driving somewhere, hopefully selling you something for a good dollar value, picking up something local and bringing it back to sell to people in Sydney. And that's sort of in some ways our philosophy. In terms of our own infrastructure project, it's a dual facility project linking Badgerys Creek in Western Sydney with Blaney in the Central West. 50,000 tonne facility. In the case of Badgerys Creek, it's a receival, decontamination, initial processing, and then it's a transfer to Blaney, where we'll do open windrow composting and obviously product manufacture and sales. For those of you who haven't seen Badgerys Creek, it's a 34 hectare, 75 acre site. We do sandstone recycling, we got a packaging operation, bark, sawdust composting, so forest residues composting, biosolids composting. We're a very long-standing biosolids green waste composter. And down in this little corner here is the start of what will be our new FOGO facility. Currently it's about probably a 2 hectare site. The facility itself will be about, pretty picture, will be about a 4,000 square metre building. Pretty simple as buildings go. Bins for storage. You'll see wherever you go on our sites, we like having products sitting in bins for sale. A couple of doors at one end, trucks will come in, they'll unload and they'll go out the other end. Like I say, it's a reasonably simple model that we have. It's the best schematic I could find, unfortunately, at the moment. But basically, the trucks will come in, they'll unload, there'll be a decontamination station, picking station. We've got a depackaging line going in as well. That'll then go into a fairly fine grinding process and then onto an aerated floor. It's a negative air building, so we'll suck down through the floor, out through a biofilter, and material in each day will go out each day. So that's the nub of our processing at Badgerys Creek. It'll then go over the mountains, which for those of you who know us, has been a strategy of ours for some decades, out to Blaney, which is 240 odd k's west of Sydney. It was a gold mine. Our lake used to be an open cut mine. They went underground, they punctured the riverbed, flooded the mine and went broke. We eventually came along and took over the site. So we've certainly got some water there. We've got about a 30 acre and the old money processing platform, all predominantly at the moment composting open windrow biosolids green waste. We've got a food waste licence there, so we've started in the last 12 to 18 months taking reasonable amounts of assorted food, meat and other wastes that we're just playing with at the moment. This area here we're starting to clear out for what will be essentially a large area of concrete and screening plant and decontamination of finished product. So it's low-tech by design, and I think those of you who know us understand that that's very much the type of business that we are. And just getting on to that, which is probably where I think there is a sort of to some extent, a philosophical divide in our industry. If you look at a business like ours, where I see ourselves very much as a traditional horticultural supplies company, we are a low capex, source separated processor historically, low gate fee, product value chain driven. We always have been, we always will be. It's a fundamental part of our business. We're a low cost, we are unashamedly low complexity, and I think 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, if you'd come here, that wasn't the flavour of the month. But I think there is a bit of a change in the market in terms of levels of complexity of processing. And in the main, we have unrestricted markets. The alternative, I'm biased, obviously, so don't expect me to be unbiased. The alternatives in terms of waste technologies, they tend to be driven by waste companies over the last 10 years. They have a high capex, often mixed waste streams, but obviously not only mixed waste streams, high gate fee, relatively speaking, and low or $0 end product value. And people will debate on that, and I'm happy to debate that at some stage if you feel like it. And some of those streams obviously have restricted markets. Question I would pose, and I think it's quite reasonable given the last 5 or 6 or 7 years of history, is have we overcomplicated the solutions? And I think there is a case to say that we have. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say that some of the complex technologies either have not delivered in terms of the technology itself or on the outputs of the technologies themselves. So in terms of processing, as I say, we're a relatively simple business. You'll see open windrows with windrow turners. You'll see static piles, air absorb technology. They're simple with or without covers. That's, in our experience, been able to give us very well composted, very mature quality products. I obviously wasn't going to put up a slide of someone else's AWT of various sorts, but I did borrow that slide. And I put it up there, this isn't an MSW source separated argument. It's a debate around, I guess, the risk associated with technologies. It's extraordinary, really, how much technology has come into the country in the last 10 or 15 years. And I think to think that there is $1.2 billion of investment. Some of these are proposed, by the way, so they're not all current. $1.2 billion of investment, $500 million of capital write-offs. It's a risk that I don't think was recognised when these sorts of technologies were coming into play, and obviously it's, in hindsight, been, in some cases, not a good result. Obviously there are some successes, so it's not, don't get me wrong, there have been some successes, but there certainly are some risks. In terms of us, I mean, why ANL? Greg Freeman said to me the other day that ANL has been conspicuous by its absence in this sector. I think people who know me know that I don't mind being conspicuous. I don't particularly like being absent in markets, and we certainly have been absent. We're not anymore. We're competitors by nature, and it is a market where there's a stream that we believe has significant value. We think it's relatively simple to manage. We think it will be relatively clean. The proof will be in the pudding. And we're a very strong believer that that material has very good agricultural value. And there is certainly a difference of opinion around its value in the marketplace. Again, time will probably tell. And I guess I'd say for most of us, our objective is getting sustainability and long-term resource recovery. And that's probably the debate that needs to be had, because there's no point pulling out 400,000 tonne of food waste on top of what we currently have if we can't do it for, ever and a day. So the solution to technology and the market philosophy in particular will be critical to the success of projects and recovery over time. In our case, agriculture is the market for us, and I think probably for many of us. Obviously we need to talk to it. It needs to be sustainable in terms of the products we deliver. We need to make it affordable and valuable. But I wouldn't underplay the difficulty that we're going to have. This is an old slide for those of you around when the compost roadmap was done, but it's certainly still poignant. What that's showing you is the number of intensive hort and agricultural enterprises in the LGAs that gross more than $500,000 per annum. Where there's the light green, there's only a handful of them. Where you've got the darker green, there's probably 7 or 8. When you get to the reds, you're finding around about 11, 12, 13 within the LGA. You can see it's not until you get 300 k's from Sydney that you start to find a relative footprint of reasonably profitable agricultural enterprises. That's why we place ourselves at Blaney, because we're 240 k's west of Sydney. So you have to get out there to be close to where you think there is at least some people who can afford to pay. Forget this is a couple of ugly slides coming up. This is not agriculture intent, but the reason for putting that up is to show that in terms of philosophy, it's all about range. You need to give people lots of options. If they don't like composted, give them uncomposted. If they don't like uncoloured, give them red. If they don't like red, give them blue. I'm not saying blue is necessarily our strongest seller. However, you know what? You never know. We wouldn't have thought red would have been a great seller, but it is. In terms of delivery, buy it in bags, buy it in bulk, deliver it by a helicopter if you happen to own one or two. Put them out as compost blankets. There's a whole. It's about the delivery and the service of the product. In the ag sector, look, our philosophy is you just can't miss any, and we've found, not unlike, I guess, the urban amenity market, where you've had to get in the bulk of bags, you've had to get in the blower trucks, you've had to do things a bit differently. We've had to get into spreading operations because there's a disconnect between someone getting a load of compost and someone actually being able to apply it. But don't be mistaken, there are residential properties, there are other markets in across the range other than just agriculture. So people will go to Bunnings or somewhere else and buy a bag of compost. So it's about whether or not you have the mix in terms of the sales side. I just in terms of our lessons, the customer is usually right. Is always right usually. You listened this morning to Jack. The reason those cows were actually grazing where they were grazing was because if you put enough organics into the soil, you get the microbial populations, it processes the organics, it jams sugars up into the grass, and they eat the grass because it's sweeter. They put on body weight because they're chewing fat, essentially, sugars. That's the nuts and bolts of why that worked and why the cattle were actually grazing where they were. If you sell a message like that, you will actually engage people in a different way. In terms of markets, 10 years ago, viticulture was going to be our saviour. We've just had about a metre of rain, so they're not going to be so keen over the next few months. Interestingly, there was an article on the radio the other day saying that since 2011, the consumption of grain-based foods, particularly breads, has dropped over that 4 years by 30%. It was quite significant when you think of the impact of that on the people that we're trying to sell to. I'll get down to, I guess, the killer. For those of you who are in local government, if you want to get very competitive pricing, don't give us contamination. Contamination kills our products and kills our markets, and it absolutely destroys consumer confidence. And look, we're not living in fairyland. We know contamination is going to come in. I think there is an onus on all of us to make sure that it doesn't go out. Now, I'm not saying that we don't all have issues at times with products, but it hurts us when we put particularly bad quality products in the markets. And that's about it. Thank you very much.